Live from London, this is BBC News. Israeli forces recover the bodies of 6 people taken hostage by Hamas in a tunnel under the city of Rafah. One of them is an American citizen. The front line of Gaza's health crisis. Fighting pauses scheduled so children can start receiving polio vaccinations in a mass immunization campaign by humanitarian agencies. Airports across 30 European countries go back to their old rulebook, reintroducing carry-on liquid restrictions. Hello, I'm Catherine Biarahanga. We start with breaking news from Gaza. The Israeli military has confirmed that 6 bodies found in a tunnel in the city of Rafah in Gaza were those of hostages held by Hamas after the October the 7th attack. It's named them as Israelis Alexander Lobanov, Almog Sarusi, Eden Yerushlami, Ori Danino, Carmel Gat, and Hirsch Goldberg Polin, who was an American citizen. He had appeared in a Hamas video with an amputated arm a few months ago. In a statement, President Biden called his death tragic and reprehensible, saying Hamas leaders will pay for their crimes. The Missing Families Forum has again urged the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire for the release of the remaining hostages. Well, let's look at the wider situation, and we can now speak to Mohamed Taha from BBC Arabic, who joins me in the studio. Mohamed, so this breaking news coming in the past hour. We've also heard from the Israeli military. What did they have to say about the circumstances in which these bodies were recovered?
Well, the spokesperson of the Israeli forces, Daniel Hagari, said that these hostages were killed by Hamas and that they were found in a tunnel in Rafah. This is the same tunnel that the Israeli forces managed to secure the hostage Farhan al-Qadi last week alive, but they found these hostages dead. So the families of the hostages, as you said previously in the statement, they are really keen for a hostage deal to happen, and they see that the Israeli operation is causing these deaths. We don't know if when the Israeli forces went to this tunnel and secured one alive hostage that forced the militants to kill the other hostages, that they were at the same tunnel, or they were killed by Israeli shelling, as happened before with other hostages. And as you said, one of these hostages is American, and there are other 4 American hostages still in captivity with Hamas. That's why we can see many statements from the American officials, like the President Biden, Kamala Harris, the Vice President, Foreign Minister Blinken. There are massive statements from them now calling for a ceasefire, for a hostage deal, and for the release of the rest of the hostages.
And just to remind our audience that following the October the 7th attack, more than 250 hostages were taken by Hamas on October the 7th. Just remind us of the situation when it comes to hostages. Some have been rescued, others have been found dead, and some still remain there in Gaza.
Indeed, half of these 240 hostages that they were taken on the 7th of October were released in November in a hostage deal between Israel and Hamas. We saw the pictures everywhere of the exchange and the pause of fighting there. That was collapsed there when Hamas said that all the other hostages that they held are military hostages, and the conditions of the exchange should be changed. The truce collapsed at that time, and the Israeli operation intensified in Gaza, and we started to see dead bodies coming in and out several times. There are 3 hostages were killed by the Israeli forces by mistake, and we saw the pictures of that when they came out, and the Israeli forces killed them by mistake, and some of them were killed by shelling. And we saw the massive operation in Nusayrat where about 200 Palestinians were killed, and the Israeli forces managed to secure 3 alive hostages. This was a kind of a turning point in the hostage situation, where Hamas said, this is risking the lives of the rest of the hostages, and the conditions that the other hostages will be in will be tightened. From that time, we started to see many dead bodies that the Israeli forces would found. They found these 6 hostages a few weeks ago. They found several dead hostages as well. We understand that Hamas might be holding around 40 alive hostages and some of the dead bodies at the moment. And the hope now is for a deal to happen to secure these hostages. We understand, Catherine, that today is going to be a massive day in Israel, as the families of the hostages is vowing for paralyzing Israel today and asking for a hostage deal to happen to bring the rest of hostages alive. And I'm sure the United States is really keen to have this rest of 4 American hostages alive as well. So we might see big developments today, putting more pressures on the Israeli government to get the rest of hostages alive.
Mohamed, thank you. Just stay with us and let's bring in our Middle East correspondent, Jon Donnison, who joins us live from Jerusalem. Good morning there, Jon. Just tell us about some of the reaction there in Israel to this news that 6 hostages have been found dead in Gaza.
That's right. Well, first of all, let's just confirm those names again of the 6 bodies that have been found. Alexander Lobanov, Almog Sarusi, Eden Yerushlami, Ori Danino, Carmelgat and Hirsch Goldberg Polin, who, as we were hearing there, was also an American citizen. The reaction here in Israel has obviously been one of sadness from many people, especially for the families of those 6 people. Actually, the forum that represents hostage families has issued a statement, obviously very saddened by this news, but saying that they all could have been still alive if the Israeli government had pushed harder to get a hostage release and ceasefire deal done. Those families have been very critical of the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has insisted that military pressure is the best way to get the remaining hostages out, and we think there are around about 60 hostages still alive in Gaza. So yeah, huge sadness really amongst the Israeli population here, and it's certainly going to be dominating the news headlines today.
And we've had a statement from the Israeli military as well. What have they had to say, and how much pressure is there going to be on the government there in Israel to reach that agreement? It says it is trying to, as you've mentioned there, but will this add to the pressure that it's under at the moment?
Well, the Israeli military is saying these bodies were discovered in a tunnel in Rafah in the southern city of Gaza. That's where Israeli forces managed to free a Bedouin hostage who was being held last week. Now, the chief military spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, has just given a briefing where he said that the 6 bodies discovered today had been brutally murdered, as he put it, by Hamas just shortly before Israeli forces discovered the bodies. So I think that will only add to the frustration and anger from those families of the remaining hostages. And, you know, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is under pressure to do this hostage release deal. The Americans are pushing for it very, very hard indeed. There are many people in Israel who are pushing for it hard, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. At the moment, we've got these ceasefire talks, or talks about ceasefire talks, still ongoing in Cairo, with Egyptian, Qatari and American officials trying to get towards this bridging proposal for a hostage release and ceasefire deal. But it doesn't really seem to be getting anywhere. So sure, it will add a bit more pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu, but certainly he's resisted that pressure so far.
And we're yet to hear from Hamas. Do they usually comment when incidents like this happen? And What do you think the pressure is on them within the region to try and reach an agreement as well, considering the hostages that have been taken and when more bodies, unfortunately, are found there in Gaza?
I think we can expect some sort of statement from Hamas later today on these 6 bodies that have been discovered. They will give their version of events. Previously, they have often said that hostages were killed in Israeli military operations or airstrikes. We have no idea at the moment of whether that is the case here. Certainly the Israeli military are not saying that. As for the pressure that Hamas is under, well, they are under pressure, but they're not taking part in these talks at the moment because they say they agreed to a deal that was put to them by the Americans back in July, and they say that Israel has changed the conditions of that deal since, in particular on the issue of how many and where Israeli troops should remain in Gaza and crucially along that border with Egypt. That is something that Hamas is not happy about. It's something the Egyptians are not happy about. So really, those talks, although there's been pressure for weeks and months now, I don't really get a sense that a deal is imminent.
Thank you very much. That's the BBC's Jon Donnison live for us in Jerusalem there. And just reminder really of that breaking news coming in from the Israeli military confirming that it has found the bodies of 6 hostages taken by Hamas during the October the 7th attack. It's named them as Alexander Lobanov, Almog Sarusi, Eden Yerushlami, Ori Danino, Carmel Gat, Hirsch Goldberg Polin, and Hirsch Goldberg Polin was an American citizen. And we can bring in again Mohamed Taha from BBC Arabic. And Mohamed, we've heard there from the families of the hostages, some of them who've now confirmed to have died, but also others who remain in Gaza. We heard there from Jon Donnison talking about the pressure on the Israeli government and perhaps on Hamas. How do you think they're likely to respond as this news unfolds?
We're really looking forward to hear from Hamas. We heard from the Americans, we heard from the Israeli side, and we really want to hear from Hamas what are the conditions of the death of these hostages, where they say that they were killed by Israeli forces, or they will say that they will take responsibility of killing them, or what are the conditions around them? Were they killed all at once recently, or they were killed gradually on the last few months? We heard from some families that they believe that one hostage were killed in July, the other were killed in April. This is to be confirmed also by Israeli authorities, not by the families, as might be not accurate at the moment. We're really looking forward to hear from Hamas what are the conditions of killing, of the deaths of these hostages, to have the complete pictures of all the parties involved in what happened.
And let's take a look at the role of the US in the midst of this crisis, this war that's been unfolding in Gaza. President Biden today calling the death of Hirsch Goldberg Polin tragic and reprehensible, saying Hamas leaders will pay for their crimes. But the Americans really are trying to reach an agreement in Gaza and reach a ceasefire. How are people viewing their role in the Middle East?
Indeed. The United States is the key part of most of the development in the Middle East. They have the biggest troops in the Middle East. They have the USS Roosevelt air carrier. They have the USS Lincoln, and they sent recently also a nuclear submarine to the region. They have lots of military presence in the Middle East, and their pressure is really counted at the moment, and they have the biggest weight in the negotiations, on the negotiation table as well. We saw recently the American position a little bit changed from what President Biden offered in July about the full withdrawal, Israeli withdrawal from Gaza and the big ceasefire, to kind of agreeing somehow of the Israeli view of staying in the Philadelphia corridor in the borders between Gaza and Egypt. That change in the American position that aligned with the Israeli position might make the negotiations problematic. It might make some of the negotiators in Egypt and Qatar a little bit not happy with that change. That's why the negotiations in the last 2 weeks went standstill and didn't achieve anything. Now the eye, as you rightly said, on the United States. They have the weight, the political weight, the military weight, as they provide Israel with massive amount of military aid and financial aid. The eye is the United States. Will this incident change their position and make them put more pressure on the Israeli government to strike a deal, along with the internal pressures on the Israeli government from the hostages' families? Will all of these pressures will make a change and will make the parties strike a deal? This is a turning point now, the finding of these 6 hostages, to see development in these negotiations, maybe to strike a deal and to have these alive, remaining alive hostages who are between 40 and 60 back alive, and to remove the suffering also from the Palestinians. As you rightly said, you commented on starting the polio vaccination in Gaza. We expect to see in 45 minutes this pause in fighting happens. We were looking forward if the pause in fighting would happen or not, and we would see the vaccination would happen or not, and this is maybe would be an introduction to having a more constructive negotiations, and a deal happens between Israel and Hamas to return back the hostages back to their families and to remove the suffering from the civilians in the Strip of Gaza.
Mohamed, thank you. That's Mohamed Taha there from BBC Arabic.
Thank you, Taha.
And as Mohamed was just mentioning there, UN officials and local health workers are rolling out a mass vaccination program for polio in Gaza that will rely on a series of limited pauses in fighting between Israeli forces and Hamas fighters. The World Health Organization says it will need to vaccinate at least 90% of children under 10 for the campaign to succeed. Its campaign was organized after a 10-month-old baby was partially paralyzed by the first case of the virus in 2 decades. On Saturday, medics vaccinated children at one hospital in a symbolic move ahead of the official campaign. From Jerusalem, our Middle East correspondent Yolande Nell reports.
Just 2 drops. As the UN begins vaccinating against polio in Gaza, a dose is easy to give. But carrying out a mass immunisation campaign in a combat zone is a huge challenge. Parents of the first vaccinated children are relieved.
I was worried and afraid because this is scary, the polio disease. This disease makes the children unable to move.
Baby Abdul Rahman was crawling early, but now his mum worries he'll never be able to walk. He was the first child found to have polio in Gaza in 25 years, and it paralysed his leg. Because of the war, he wasn't vaccinated, and now medical care is limited.
Aboud wants to live and be treated. He wants to live and walk like other children. I feel a lot of guilt that he didn't get the vaccination, but I couldn't give it to him because of our circumstances.
Displaced 5 times, the baby's family now lives in a crowded tent camp in Deir Balach in central Gaza. Raw sewage flows through streets nearby. Conditions are ideal for diseases to spread, especially polio, which is highly infectious. Since discovering the virus, UN agencies have been racing to set up an emergency mass vaccination programme. And with war raging, they've negotiated 3 localised 3-day pauses in fighting with Israel and Hamas. UN officials say the plan is not ideal, but it's workable.
What we are aiming at is to have 640,000 children below the age of 10 vaccinated in just a few days in the Gaza Strip. We need to reach at least 90%. Without that, there is a risk that the virus would mutate and that the transmission could continue.
Children make up nearly half the population of Gaza, and the past year has deprived many of their loved ones, their homes and health. With no end in sight to the war, the hope is that at least one new source of suffering can be eliminated. Yolande Nell, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Airports in the European Union and other Schengen area countries which had scrapped 100mm liquid limits for hand luggage are reinstating them from today. The European Commission said it's a temporary measure to address a technical issue with new equipment, but has not said how long it will remain in place. Here's our transport correspondent, Katie Austin.
For a while, it looked like the era of the tiny toiletry was nearly over. All major airports in the UK were told to put in new state-of-the-art scanners. They would allow the 100ml limit on liquid containers going through security and cabin bags to be lifted.
Put your tray underneath.
There have been delays getting the kit in place at the biggest hubs, but some regional ones had fully installed it before June this year and dropped the old rules. Then, in June, the government suddenly announced the 100ml restriction was back. It's given no date for scrapping it again. Now, any EU airports which had moved over to the new scanners are also having to revert to the old limit. The European Commission says a technical issue with the equipment needs sorting.
The big issue we've got now is there is real lack of clarity for consumers. So we've seen in the busy periods when people are travelling, the confusion that entails when people are really not sure of what the process is now when they're travelling with liquids. And we have real disparity, not only across UK airports we have had, but also across the EU as well.
Rome and Amsterdam are among the locations which had brought in the high-tech scanning machines. Some others had started rolling them out. It's a very mixed picture. But what's for sure is that any which had got the scanners in place and eased their rules are now having to revert to 100ml. As with the UK, the EU's given no indication of when the restrictions will end. Katie Austin, BBC News.
We'll continue to follow the situation in Israel and the Palestinian territories, and we have some breaking news coming in from Hebron in the occupied West Bank. Israeli media reporting 2 Israelis have been killed after their vehicle was fired upon, and this is news coming in from Hebron. This was near the city of Hebron, and we have some live pictures there from the West Bank. Of course, there has been a real focus in the territory there following the Israeli operation in the occupied territory. And we can bring in Mohamed Taha from BBC Arabic. Mohamed, we've been following developments in the occupied West Bank over the past few days. Just tell us what we know about this incident near the city of Hebron.
It's very unfortunate, Catherine. In the day we expected to have calm in the region by having this vaccination campaign in Gaza that would coincide with a pause in fighting in nearly half an hour. It's very concerning to see an escalation in the West Bank and in Gaza, the hostage situation. And in West Bank we saw this incident of killing two Israeli police personnel. So what happened is there are militants in Hebron went to a military area, and they managed to fire rounds into this police vehicle. They killed 2, and there is a seriously injured third personnel, and they managed to flee. Now there is a big Israeli operation in the village of Edna. They are trying to catch these preparators of this incident. This incident happened nearby the Tarqumia security barrier near Hebron. So the Hebron, situated for the viewers who don't know, Hebron in the southern part of the West Bank, in the eastern borders of Israel, and we understand that this area were calm compared to Jenin in the north.
And Mohamed, just to remind viewers of the breaking news over the past hour or so, which is that the Israeli army confirming that there have been 6 hostages, the bodies of 6 hostages recovered from Gaza. They've been named as Alexander Lobanov, Almog Sarusi, Eden Yerushlami, Ori Danino, Carmel Gat, Hirsch Goldberg, Polin. And just briefly, Mohamed, just remind us about the circumstances under which their bodies were recovered.
According to the Israeli spokesperson Daniel Hagari, he said in a press conference that they were found in a tunnel in Rafah, the same tunnel that they secured an alive hostage last week, Al-Qadi, the Arab Bedouin hostage. The same tunnel they found these 6 hostages. And Daniel Hagari accused Hamas militants of killing them. We didn't hear back from Hamas what are the circumstances of killing these hostages. We can see that there is a big reaction from the United States towards this.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Mohamed.
Catherine.
That's Mohamed Taha from BBC Arabic, bringing us all that analysis and news of those developments coming in from Gaza, as well as the occupied West Bank. The Israeli army confirming that it's recovered the bodies of 6 hostages taken by Hamas. You're watching BBC News with me, Catherine Biarahanga. Stay with us.